morning, everyone, and thank you once again for watching our episode today. It's episode 20 of the Blowback Roundtable. We are honored to have our special guest, Daniel Lazare. He is in New York State at the moment.
New York
New York
City.
City. Awesome. Everybody knows Carlo and Ben. I was just going to hand it over to Dan and ask him to tell us a little about himself. You want to go ahead, Dan?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a journalist and author. I've written 3 books about the U.S. Constitution and allied political questions. The best known book is called The Frozen Republic, which came out in '96, and essentially said that America was at a profound structural impasse. And with all due modesty, every prediction I made in that book has come true in spades. But it was an easy call because the problems are just so plain, even though no one cares to recognize them. And that's it. I now write I've written for a large number of publications over the years, but now I'm writing every week, essentially, for a British Marxist journal called the Workly Weeker. The Weekly Worker, the Weekly Worker, available at weeklyworker.co.uk.
And I want to mention, I read an article by you. It was like the new propaganda offensive against Syria, something like that. It was back in 2016, and it was really right at the beginning of the whole Syria thing, and it really helped me to understand what was going on, because at the very beginning, with the color revolution, and you don't know, it's hard to really understand things, but that article was really great. So you're really great on geopolitical issues, on big picture, as well as constitutional United States kind of issues. Would you like to maybe give a brief framework of geopolitical history leading up to where we are now and all these big, profound changes going on? Like, how do you see things? Like that could take 4 hours, or it could take a few minutes. Could you give us the few-minute version?
Yeah, I can give you the short version. It's really fascinating what's going on. But essentially in the Ukraine, in Armenia and Azerbaijan, and in Washington D.C., they're all kind of linked. In Washington, we're seeing the imminent shutdown of the government. That seems to be pretty clear. There doesn't seem to be any way around that. And that is just due to, among other things, a complete mechanistic breakdown in this 236-year-old constitutional system, which dates from the age of silk knee breeches, powdered wigs, and slavery, but which is still in place. And it is exhausted, it's broken down, it's dysfunctional, and it's dragging society down. And I think that's really actually not a terribly controversial point of view these days. But we have this American empire, which is floundering. It is picking fights all over the place, which it cannot follow through on, and its aggressiveness merely serves to highlight its own weakness. And in the Ukraine, the offensive is going very poorly. It's stalled out essentially. We have the extraordinary scenes in the Canadian Parliament last Friday, where essentially the Parliament just saluted, applauded a veteran of the Waffen-SS, and this is not just some kind of mistake. This follows from the entire nature of the war. And then we see in Armenia the really tragic scenes. Thousands of people displaced by this Azerbaijan offensive. And remember, Azerbaijan has been a favorite of the EU and US. The current Armenian regime has been very hostile to Russia, to the great delight of Washington, so therefore it has essentially not broken but reduced relations with Moscow, and it's been left high and dry as a consequence. I mean, I think the situation in Armenia and Azerbaijan, that we're heading for war there.
I,
People in Armenia are furious. They're frightened. Uh,
we actually have some footage if you'd like to watch it. The second clip, Billy Bob, because Nagorno-Karabakh, that area, which Nikol Pashinyan, the stooge you talked about, he's basically said, well, it's no longer ours. We have footage of the Christian population. They're basically fleeing with everything they can put on their car, if you want to watch.
Okay, let me try and share that.
I mean, just
Was this
look.
the right clip?
Yeah, it is. You can go full screen if you like, but that's a stall. You know, it's basically blocked traffic, just exiting, trying to flee wherever they can. It's tragic.
So this is ethnic Armenians trying to leave the territory that was recently taken over by Azerbaijan.
Yes, Nagorno-Karabakh is basically ceased to exist as a self, what do you call it, an independent republic, and this is the absolute queue of people leaving.
So I mean, it seems a little like ethnic cleansing, is what's going on,
or fleeing such.
Oh yes, there are reports of violence, of apartments being trashed, of people being harassed, homes being blown up. So yeah, I think this qualifies as ethnic violence, as ethnic cleansing, no doubt about it. And the U.S. of course is trying to wriggle out of trouble, but there's no doubt that it bears a great deal of responsibility for this debacle. The other country which bears a great deal of responsibility is Israel, which has actually been in a growing military alliance with Azerbaijan, and exchanging military, know-how, and it really bears a great deal of responsibility as well. And oddly enough, Iran is actually on the side of Armenia. And so, that's one more reason for the U.S. not to, to side with Azerbaijan. It's a tragedy. It's an absolute tragedy. No one has clean hands in this affair, but it is really a tragedy to see this happen.
Yeah. If you're talking about the region in general, there's another big country, the swing state of the world, you could say. Turkey is just next door, and they also will have something to say about this whole affair. But yeah, it's just I guess the Ukraine front extended southward. It is trying to open up a second
Yeah,
corridor.
and Turkey is a major patron of Azerbaijan as well. So
so the United States empire, I mean, they're on the decline. If they don't do something, they're going to be surpassed by China, Russia, working with sending all the energy to Europe would have created a huge economy, a block that would have been bad for U.S. economic interests. So so in order to maintain their preeminence and their global hegemony, the U.S. had to do something. So what do you do when you're facing Russia and China? Well, it seems like, and I've said this before, Trump was maybe thinking, let's be friends with Russia, and then together we'll isolate China. But the Democrats, or the actually not the Democrats, but the unit party, the consensus, the ruling establishment consensus was, well, we're going to defeat Russia. We're not going to be friends with them. We're going to defeat Russia, and then we're going to isolate China. So that kind of seems like what's going on. And in 2019, I believe there was one of those policy papers from the Rand Corporation or something, talking about a strategy to weaken Russia. And they talk specifically about, ratcheting up the tensions and the violence in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, and using that as a focal point of, putting pressure on Russia. So it's all a concerted effort, it seems, to, just to initiate some kind of an escalation that the U.S. can opportunistically seize upon to, weaken their rivals and forestall the inevitable collapse of Western hegemony. What about that, Dan? Do you think there's any truth to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the nickname for Hillary Clinton is the Queen of Chaos, and I think the U.S. essentially is trying to detach Central Asia, which includes Armenia and Azerbaijan, from Russian influence. They're trying to pry those countries away. But in so doing, they're going to, open the door to a whole, a number of internal conflicts that could easily get out of control. The Armenia-Azerbaijan is the latest, but I think it was Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan had a short border war. I think it was last year. And there are many more conflicts like that in the offing, and the U.S. therefore, is happy to stoke conflict if it can reap some kind of a strategic benefit. I think that's what we're seeing.
And no example illustrates that like the Ukraine example. I mean, that's exactly what they did in Ukraine, fomenting ethnic tension between the Russians and the neo-Nazis, and then, turning it into a civil war, which Russia then joined. Is that your take, or do you have a different perspective?
No, that's my take. My take is the U.S. has been working to detach the Ukraine from Russian influence since the early aughts, and it has not shrunk from working with neo-Nazi elements.
Absolutely. From the early aughts, I might even say the 1950s, like directly after the end of the war.
That certainly is true. That certainly is true. Yes, there was a huge CIA effort in support of the pro-Nazi insurgents throughout the Soviet Union, the Western Soviet Union, from the Baltic down to the Black Sea, the Ukraine, the Baltic states, etc. All saw pro-Nazi insurgencies continuing into the early 50s with Western, especially CIA help, and these were very bloody affairs. Tens of thousands of lives were lost.
Oh yeah. And that's a magnificent blunder, I think, on the part of the Canadian Parliament, that this issue they didn't want to talk about. They didn't want it in the spotlight, and it's brought it to the forefront of everything. I don't know if you saw this. We have another clip of Chrystia Freeland answering a question about what should we do? Shall we check all of these Nazis and their war criminal pasts? And she's fidgeting with her hand. She's very, very nervous. I don't think I need to introduce Chrystia Freeland to anyone here. We all know of her past. Do you know which one? Yeah. I think this is amazing.
Canadians can know how many veterans who fought with the Nazis are here in our country. Will the government do so? And what is your response to that?
I think, let me just start by reiterating, and I don't think it can be said too many times, how hurtful for so many people in Canada and around the world what happened was and has been and continues to be.
But we're not going to do anything. That's her long answer in so many words.
As MPs, in our capacity as MPs, it's important for appropriate next steps in the House to be taken. And I think that is our immediate focus. And as a government, we're going to be very thoughtful about any further steps that need to be taken.
Well, I'm reassured. How about you, Dan?
Yeah. Well, the problem, of course, is her grandfather was the editor of a pro-Nazi newspaper, a pro-Nazi Ukrainian nationalist newspaper under the occupation. I don't want to tar her. The sins of the father should not be passed on to the child. That's not her fault. She's not responsible, except that she has lied about this connection and has accused those bringing it up of being Russian influence agents of some sort. So that is inexcusable, and that essentially is the same logic which led to the scene in Parliament last Friday.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that she expects us to believe that she had no idea who this Honka guy was. Where her granddad, someone put this together, I think 4 steps in command removed from Adolf Hitler. If you go down in the information from Goebbels and all the way down to her granddad, and she had no idea. You can look at her. It was her biggest triumph in Canada. You can look at her cheering, clapping, and she was actually happy. But now, we're not going to do anything. It was a painful moment for us.
Well, I can't verify this, and maybe I misheard him, but Scott Ritter said she actually wrote for that organ, that newspaper journal.
She wrote for another Canadian
Is that it?
Ukrainian journal. Yes, this journal that her grandfather edited was published in I think it was Krakow, which is now part of Poland.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
During the war.
I see.
So he was the editor of a pro-Nazi newspaper under the Nazis.
Yeah, and she wrote anti-Semitic pieces and that sort of thing herself.
I'm not aware she did. She actually has, believe it or not, a left-wing background. She was active in the New Democratic Party, which is the Socialist Party in Canada, as a student. But she has this family connection, and she lied about it.
Oh,
and
yeah.
she's also, and she of course has been a super strong supporter of the war in the Ukraine, and thereby covering up the real nature of Ukrainian nationalism. And she was also until last Friday she was a leading candidate to replace Jens Stoltenberg as General Secretary of NATO.
Yeah.
I think his fortunately may have ditched it.
Yeah, I hope that dream is dead now. I hope
so too. I just want to say that the war in the Ukraine is predicated on three assumptions. I mean, one is that Vladimir Putin is evil personified. The other is that his attack in February 2022 was, quote, unprovoked. And the third is that Ukrainian nationalism is pure as the driven snow. And anybody who suggests otherwise is doing Russia's dirty work. Now, all three assertions are ridiculous, but the last is especially ridiculous. And so that is what led to this scene in Parliament, where this guy, this 98-year-old veteran, hell, if he was fighting Russia, what could be wrong?
That's true.
And that was the logic. That's what caused a room of several hundred people to rise to their feet and burst in applause and describe this guy as a Canadian hero. It's a real turning point.
Yeah, it is in the PR offensive. I just found it fascinating because I studied back on the other end in Hungary of the Iron Curtain, and everybody knew that Americans, the Brits, and the Soviets defeated fascism. Okay, everybody knew that the enemy was aligned with Hitler. Like, Canadians didn't get that education, that if someone fought in World War II against Russia or the Soviet Union, that's an automatic to me. But apparently MPs didn't get that in Canada.
The historical ignorance is really amazing.
So that's the question. I mean, is it ignorance, or were they hoping that they could pass it off and be part of the process of changing people's attitudes and perspectives on that? Because there's really been a long effort to equate, communism with Nazism, and saying that they're both the same and they're both equally evil. And they were on the same side. Like, they'll even say they were on the same side. They'll talk about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. But so I'm not sold. I mean, were they really that stupid, or was it a real effort to try and just influence perception and kind of normalize this? Part of the normalization propaganda, and hoping it would go over without too much of a stuff. But maybe it was just ignorance. It's possible.
It's really both. I mean, these kinds of propaganda offensives feed off ignorance and encourage ignorance. I mean, they're all about the great art of stupefaction. They're trying to lower the collective IQ so that people will believe this utter nonsense that is coming out of NATO and the U.S.
Yeah,
it's very dangerous because it is really opening the door to a major neo-Nazi resurgence.
I couldn't be happier that there's actual global outrage over this, not just from Jewish people, from Polish people who want to extradite him. Russia also wants to extradite this guy, but it couldn't be just brushed under the rug. My theory is, yes, there's ignorance on the part of some MPs in Canada, but they were in bed with these kinds of people for 2 years. I mean, they know who Chrystia Friedland is. It's impossible that they don't know. And once you're in bed, I think you think it's normal, If we look at, we also have a clip, we don't have to keep watching clips. Trudeau made a non-apology, basically an apology to Zelensky, for bringing this up, but he shouldn't empower the Russian disinformation. So we'd rather not talk about it. And apparently he's been hiding in he has a bungalow or something like that, somewhere in the countryside for 3 days. Nobody's heard from him.
Which clip is that, Ben?
Trudeau's non-apology number 4. Somebody cut some brilliant music underneath it too.
That's not Republicans for Ukraine. Is it Time Will Tell?
It could be, time will tell. I think it's from Igor Lopotanok, who is the producer or the secondary director to the Ukraine on Fire. You know, that brilliant film by.
Okay, the one with Trudeau. Let's try. I'm going to try and share this one here.
Okay.
He's got a little mustache.
Last clip. Someone did the editing. Yeah.
Ukrainian delegation in. It is extremely troubling to think that this egregious error is being politicized by Russia and its supporters to provide false propaganda about what Ukraine is fighting for.
Yeah, Putin sent him, you know. It's not the Canadians who invited him. Putin sent him. That was the last clip, sorry.
Yeah.
It was fascinating.
Well, I think it was Trudeau's dad that, facilitated, he definitely harbored, the 2000 Waffen-SS Nazis in Canada for a long time. This morning I saw an article from 1997 where the Simon Wiesenthal Center was discussing that. And I guess, there was 9,000 survivors from these units. 2,000 went to Canada. The rest went to Britain. And that was in the 50s. And they've just been nurtured and harbored, living under their real names, getting pensions, a lot of them. And it was an outrage. It was an outrage back in 1997 when that article I saw was written. But, it's, again, like Dan was saying, it's the power of propaganda. They're able to, spotlight what they want to spotlight, and everything else just gets swept under the rug and nobody talks about it. So that's part of the propaganda machine, the insidiousness of it, dumbing people down and, hiding those inconvenient facts that they don't want people to talk about, and then making people talk about the stupid things that don't matter. That's what they're good at.
I think, and Dan, your thoughts on this, but this has backfired. They thought people have the memory of the goldfish, but even a lot of good Canadians were outraged. A lot of good Americans were outraged, whose granddads fought against the Nazis. Many of them died. And they said, this is one bridge too far, one step too far. What do you think?
I totally agree. I think it's a disaster. And by the way, Zelensky was in the audience. He had just given a speech, and he was pumping his fist. Yeah. And he knows what's going on. He knows who these people are.
Yes.
He has entered into a deal with the devil like no other, and it's a disaster. I think it's a turning point, a real turning point. And yeah, the members of the Canadian Parliament may have short historical memories, but fortunately, that doesn't hold true for the rest of the Canadian, U.S., British, etc. population. They have very long memories. They know what that war is about, and they don't want to open the door to any kind of neo-Nazi resurgence, which is precisely what this war is doing.
Yeah. Funnily, you said British, but one thing I didn't pick up, I scanned the news pretty deeply on this subject, but the British mainstream news, Telegraph, places like that, the Guardian, they have just steered clear of this story, not a mention of the Canadian story. That was very odd to me.
I mean, I would expect that. That wouldn't surprise me.
I think the American press is trying to play it down too, but I think it's really registering with the public. It's got legs, as we say.
Yeah, and that's a great thing. What do you think the future portends for Ukraine, for the United States, for Russia, for China, for humanity? I'm pretty optimistic. I know Ben's optimistic. We don't think there's many cards, for the West to play, and there's an inevitability, about their demise, and just like there's an inevitability regarding China's ascension. But there's nuclear weapons. There's conventional war. There's a few things that can happen. What are your thoughts? And are you optimistic, pessimistic?
Well, I'm always critical. I always describe myself as a critical optimist.
I like that.
But I mean, there's the things are going to get very hairy, no question about it.
Oh yeah.
First of all, as someone said, predictions are really difficult, especially when they involve the future. And I don't know what's going to happen there. There are any number of scenarios. Russia seemed to crack during the mutiny, the Prigozhin mutiny. But I could very easily see. I could see the Ukraine cracking. They are taking tremendous punishment, and I could imagine Zelensky, winding up hanging from a lamppost, courtesy of the Azov battalion. I mean, I don't know. These are just hazarding guesses. But if the war continues going poorly for the Ukraine, it could very easily crack, and if it cracks, that could lead to an internal explosion, which would not be good for Zelensky, who's too afraid at this point to hold an election.
Oh yeah. Have you watched that interview with Zelenskaya and Zelensky about maybe him taking part in? It's not a clip. We don't have to play it, but he's not sure he's actually going to run for president. That's the long and short of it. But I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh no, and he's his behavior is increasingly erratic. This thing in Canada was a disaster for him as much as it was for Trudeau, and the crazy things like sending secret messages to Washington offering to bomb Iran, bomb drone factories in Iran,
and Syria, right?
I think Syria, it's crazy stuff, and no one, I think there's signs of growing instability, and I wouldn't be surprised if things don't crack wide open, but they could crack wide open in this country as well. I mean, things are unstable here, and we just don't know. Three leaders are fighting for their lives. Three presidents: Putin, Zelensky, and Biden. And if this war goes bad for any of them, they could find themselves losing their job or worse.
Well, I'm in Eastern Europe. I'm not going to challenge you or anything, but Putin fighting for his life is not what it looks like around here, at least. I know the mainstream headlines, but I understand the other two completely with you. Before we zoom out and go back to the globe, which is, I think, where you're at home, you're thinking, just to stick with Ukraine for a little bit, there's a lot of mixed signals going on right now. One of them was the US Congress, where a lot of Republicans are. They downgraded Biden's $24 billion aid to something like $4 billion. On the other hand, the old tortoise, McConnell, came out and said the number one priority for all Republicans for the US is funding Ukraine to defeat Russia. That's opposing signals. The same thing happened in the EU, where there is the president of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, I think, who said, we must fast-track Ukraine entrance right now. There's no room to tarry, to wait, and it should begin by Christmas. The talks should begin by Christmas. Whereas the vice chair of the same European Parliament said, it's so corrupt, it's so bad that the Ukraine can't be in the EU until 2029. That was another woman. There's a lot of internal strife in both centers, is what I see. What do you think about what Zelensky is a very tough spot, but where do you think it could swing either way, couldn't it?
Well, yeah, but I think from in Europe and North America and probably elsewhere as well, there's the split seems to be that the center is still very pro-war, but there is a growing ultra-right, and the left is confused and paralyzed and impotent. And the ultra-right is increasingly adopting an anti-war posture.
Yeah, that's so shocking to me in Europe. Yeah,
part of the problem, I think, is an underlying ideological affinity between Putin and the ultra-right in these countries. And I say this, as an opponent of the war myself, who thinks that the vilification, the demonization of Putin is absurd, but Putin is on the right, and he is making overtures to co-thinkers across Europe and the U.S. Donald Trump, for one, Marine Le Pen, and the AfD in Germany. And so I think we're starting to see a kind of an ideological realignment. In the U.S., this has been going on for some time, of course. I mean, Trump Trump essentially has been friendly to Putin since 2015, even though, of course, he did adopt a very strong anti-Russian stance while president. Nonetheless, he refused to go along with the absurd neocon demonization of Putin, which has just been extraordinary.
Don't you think that though with American politicians, whom like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Getz and Hawley, that it's really more for domestic consumption, that they feel that that's a wedge that they can use to further their political careers and their political fortunes, rather than any kind of affinity. I mean, I can think of elements of affinity with Putin in that, and as Ben has pointed out a number of times, is there's a kind of cultural conservatism that does jive with those elements. But I think that it really, given my experience with U.S. politics, it's all done for your own personal power, and I think they found a way. At least they think they found a way to make wedge elements. And one of the signs that they were successful was this new agreement they struck with McCarthy that really basically put his ability as speaker on the line virtually for it's very tenuous. I don't understand. I can't recall the details of it, but it wouldn't take much for them to oust him as speaker, and that to me speaks of a more like a self interest that American politicians seem to imbibe. Do you agree with that, or
Well, I agree. I think it's a huge element of self-interest here, but I wouldn't discount ideology either. I mean, I see people like Green or Bob Good of Virginia. I think his name is Mike Lee, the senator from Utah. These people are essentially our neo-Confederates who, deprived of the ability to actually secede from the United States, are essentially declaring war on Washington from within. I mean, Bob Good was just quoted a few days ago as saying that that the federal government does nothing good for the American people. And so, he's an extreme anti-government, anti-Washington, neo-Confederate perspective. And that's a position on the far right. I agree. I mean, Marjorie Greene has gone from nowhere to being one of the most famous faces in America and a huge mover and shaker on Capitol Hill. But she's pressing this neo-Confederate agenda, and it's working. I think that the federal government may very well will probably shut down on Saturday night at midnight. And
that's how close we are to actually running out of cash.
Yeah, the deadline is September 30th at midnight.
Oh wow!
So October 1st, which is Sunday, there could be no federal government, no operating federal government. The thing is, this has happened several times before, and they were usually always able to patch stuff up in 2 or 3 days. So it was a hiccup. But no one knows what will happen this time. And the issues are very powerful. So I mean, the country is coming apart. This is a real breakdown in basic democratic processes.
I'm going to chime in a little bit because I agree with Carlo that a lot of it is posturing, because Marine Le Pen, she was anti-war, anti-NATO, fuck Ukraine until the moment she got into power, and then she was the most. Oopsie, is something wrong with the sound? The most EU-centric person in the world. So yeah, that sort of happened. But
Maloney was another one of the same nature.
Maloney, exactly the same. Yeah, it's weird that then it's like clay. Then they just meld in. And Donald Trump ran on the wrecking ball. Fuck the government. I'm going to clean up the swamp thing, until the swamp sort of absorbed him and spat him out. No matter where we put him, he's a buffoon. We can put him on far right, far left, which I found a little sticky and a little unhelpful in this conversation. But there is that element of opportunism, sticking onto an issue. But go ahead, Dan. I don't want to put words into your mouth.
Well, I was going to say I mean Georgia Meloni, Marine Le Pen, their options are either to withdraw, so somehow pull back from NATO and the EU, or to transform NATO and the EU from within. And if this right wing drift goes far enough, they may well be able to accomplish that latter goal.
Question, because we're in the neighborhood. I'm a third-generation Hungarian communist, granddad, mom, and myself, and I cast my vote for Viktor Orban. And I'm wondering, he's probably categorized in this system as one of these right leaders. He's called the Putin's man in Europe. He was the new Adolf for a while. What's your take on our government and our stances in the last 2 years?
Well, I see Putin as an ethnic national. I'm sorry, Orban as an ethno-nationalist. I think that he is essentially pursuing right-wing policies in Hungary. I was in Budapest a few years ago, and I was struck by the rehabilitation of Admiral Horthy, for example.
That is disgusting.
But I also was very impressed by the god-awful nature of the liberal opposition, which is pro-Soros, pro-American, adopting the American line on Russia, etc. There's the usual ball of confusion, where the rightists sometimes sound more progressive than the center sometimes sounds more right-wing than the right, etc. It's all very confusing and disorienting in this country as well. Trump has sounded like a veritable peacenik when it comes to the Ukraine at times, but of course, but then he's even more bellicose
on China
when it comes to China.
Yeah, it's strange times. Thank you for that comment, especially on the Hungarian situation.
But we can discuss that a little bit more, maybe. There's cultural issues, and we can divide cultural issues on the left and the right, right? So cultural conservatives, religious, family oriented, not really wanting to embrace the LGBTQ things.
I'm very impressed with how controversial gay rights has become. This is an issue which seemed to have been, sort of out of the limelight until about 3 or 4 years ago. Suddenly now, gay rights is the battleground.
It's no longer gay rights, by the way. It's 2SLGBTQEI+, and I just learned that the 2S is people with two souls, both feminine and masculine souls in them. So this is no longer gay rights. We've had gay rights since pretty much the 1990s in Hungary, but this pride and the flag, that's brand new. That is the last few years.
It's really extraordinary. Guys like Trudeau, go to elaborate extents to demonstrate their sensitivity to these liberal pressure groups, while at the same time embracing, applauding neo-Nazis. It's extraordinary. I want to stress that I'm a very strong supporter of gay rights. I think that it's a very important political issue, which there should be no wavering on whatsoever. But nonetheless, though, to see it used this way, to see this issue suddenly become so controversial is extraordinary. And I think, by the way, that we're going to see the same thing very soon with anti-Semitism, a major growth in anti-Semitism, and as usual, fought out in an extraordinarily confused and disorienting way. And I think this is the left, what little is left of it, should, its prime task should be to sort of straighten out the debate and point out what really is at stake here, and how to analyze this problem, because I think the problem is going to grow quite explosively.
Can you tell us more? Tell us more. Go ahead.
Netanyahu gave a talk recently, in which he blamed the
Muslim, right?
Holocaust on the Palestinians, and said essentially that Hitler was only bowing under. Hitler didn't want to kill the Jews. He was only
wanted to
bowing,
expel them.
Yeah, he was bowing under to pressure from the Arabs. Now this is straightforward. This is straightforward. An attempt to alibi fascism by a guy who is heading in a fascist direction and has two out and out fascists in very important posts in his cabinet.
And head of a Zionist Jewish state, which is incredible.
Yeah. And so, we all know about the history of Zionist collaboration with anti-Semitism, and we also all know that the history of Zionism is to confuse this issue. In other words, to make Jews think that their enemies are really their friends. And Herzl said that quite explicitly in the Jewish State, his 1903 pamphlet, essentially inaugurating the modern Zionist movement. And he said, we're not going to fight the anti-Semites because they're here to stay. We're going to use them. We want them to kick out the Jews, so they go to Palestine. And this is extraordinarily disorienting for the average person in the street. I mean, who doesn't know what to think? Do I fight the anti-Semites? Do I go along with them? Do I try to make a deal with them behind everyone else's back? And so that's what we're seeing, and we're seeing the same debate again, where Netanyahu behaves outrageously, the Anti-Defamation League behaves outrageously, and Twitter's being flooded with anti-Semitic comments.
Has the ADL said anything about the neo-Nazi in
I don't believe so.
I haven't found anything either.
Yeah.
That was
that's amazing.
Yeah. My wife points that out to me. But Dan, I think you hit on the right word. Used. The LGBTQ community is being used by all sides. They're being used by the corporations. You watch, I don't know if you noticed, but when you watch commercials on television now, or when they come up on when you're watching a YouTube video, the couples will be interracial very often, being used by corporations, and
gay couples
you
as
have
well.
the other side of the coin where the far right is using them too, so that these innocent people are kind of caught in the middle. They're helpless. They're not armed. They're amorphous. They don't have basic organizations except at the grassroots level. And to go a little far afield, I was watching the speeches by the African delegates to the UN, and the Ghanaian delegate. He was going on and on about, yes, we need to abolish neocolonialism in Africa. Niger is on the right path. Burkina Faso is on the right path. So on and so forth. And then he throws out in one or two sentences, but we have no gay people in Ghana. And you go, really, that level of ignorance? You almost destroyed your entire argument for being anti-colonialism with it, because in my mind, either you're lying to the people you're addressing, or you're lying to yourself. It's incomprehensible. Of course you do. You can go back in history. I mean, you can go back to the Iliad. Achilles had Patroclus. That was his lover. It's legend. Alexander the Great had his lover. It's
the Greeks, Rome,
or whatever. And then beyond that, Native Americans have gender gradations in many tribes, 5, 10 different gender gradations. Not too different from what's going on now.
You're suggesting gays and guns and the Bible are wedge issues that are being manipulated by
yes. So anyway,
no, but what's important is that yes, there are wedge issues being manipulated by the right. You're actually correct, but they're also
and the left.
They're also used by the liberal center in a way which is almost designed to elicit a violently homophobic reaction. The same thing, same weird chemistry is at work with the the Anti-Defamation League. Whenever the Anti-Defamation League, condemns Elon Musk, the only result is that the number of anti-Semitic tweets, multiplies. So there's this kind of this negative feedback loop where everybody is encouraging this kind of explosion of bigotry, and also it's what happened with the liberal center falling apart. I think all kinds of demons are being unleashed, and the collapse of the liberal center is contributing to the growth of these tendencies.
Like
So we
Gavin
talked
Newsom's
about
new set of laws that go into effect, I think next year. Gavin Newsom's in California, in Billy Bob's state, he has a whole new set of laws that liberalize, sexuality. I mean, he's mandated same-sex restrooms and that sort of thing.
yeah.
So I get your point. And well taken.
Trying to understand all these labels and changes and all the different narratives and perspectives that are being inculcated with different groups of people who have different indoctrinations. It's difficult, but we see it's pretty clear when we talk about cultural left and cultural right. Like that's not that mysterious, but everybody here can agree that even people on the cultural right can be communists, right? I mean, can be supportive of, overthrowing the capitalist class dictatorship in this country and wanting to implement a country, its intent is to benefit the interests of the working class majority instead of just the wealthy elites. So, I mean,
but workers aren't right wing though.
Billy Bob is trying to be the unifier, but I think there's a lot more confusion than you give credit. But
no, that's true. No, I mean, I'm making an effort to just trying to, facilitate this discussion because it's very important. I think there's cultural conservatives who are workers and there's cultural liberals who are workers. And I think both of them can come together over shared interests of, material interests, economic interests, and political interests. And I think that's kind of what we need to try and facilitate. And so we got to overcome this, it seems, top-down effort to divide us along cultural lines, because I think there's a top-down effort to do that. Because like you just said, and I was a great point, the liberals push this stuff in a divisive way to get a negative reaction from cultural conservatives. And I think that's true. And I think the opposite is true, where Trump is calling everybody on the Democratic side a communist,
that's the weirdest thing.
But socialists can't dodge this issue. They've got to stand up for gay rights. They've got to be anti-racist. They've got to be, stand up for women's rights. But doesn't mean the same thing. It doesn't mean that you adopt, that you adopt these various crazy, crazy liberal groups.
Well,
but
what does it mean? Yeah, what does it mean to stand up to be opposed to racism, to be opposed to discrimination against gay people? I think a lot of cultural conservatives would support that, but again, it depends on what you actually mean in practice, maybe.
Well, I think that a socialist anti-racist, anti-homophobic stance is different than a liberal anti-racist, anti-homophobic stance. Lenin once said that even when the bourgeoisie tries to be anti-racist, it winds up being racist. And even when the bourgeoisie tries to be anti-homophobic, it winds up feeding these really dangerous tendencies. The socialists have got to carve out an independent policy for themselves, one of which is staunch opposition to racism in all its forms, whoever expresses it, and with fear and favor towards none. They have got to stand up for gay rights without, by the way, pushing crazy stuff like sex change operations for 13-year-olds.
Thank you.
And they've got to stand up for women's rights as well, without embracing the bourgeois Lenin feminism, pushed by corporate executives. So I think that but it's very important to do that. It's not an issue that the working class can dodge. It's got to face these issues really directly and forthrightly, because it's only getting to be more important.
Well, I see where it comes together. I see where the right and the left come together, and that is, we've had several people on this show and our other show who have said, well, you have young people who envision themselves as being multisexual because of the cultural pressure that they're under. But we should do something about that. We should. And my thing is, well, you talk about freedom in the bedroom. You talk about freedom to bear arms. You talk. Why should you come down hard on people who want to express that element of freedom? That's their personal choice.
Why
Get
exclude
the fuck
this freedom?
out.
Yeah.
Leave them alone.
I totally agree.
Exactly. I agree with that too. But
Yeah,
I need to chime in. Go ahead, Dan. After you, then.
I totally agree. I think we should have maximum freedom. If young people are sort of searching for their proper identity, we should give them the full freedom to do that. I do think that that surgical intervention or pharmaceutical intervention is a very different question. As somebody who was raised for girls, I have an idea good idea what adolescence is like, and I would never. The idea to me is horrifying.
Thank you for that.
But certainly, I think that we should have maximum freedom, maximum understanding, etc. And that is what should be defended. And it's coming under ferocious attack, and those attacks will only increase in the coming period.
Zero tolerance for bigotry. Zero tolerance for prejudice. No, I think that's
on no matter who expresses it. This is very important. I mean, I don't care whether it's women who are sexist or men who are sexist or whites who are racist or blacks who are racist. This is actually a very sensitive area, especially in America, for the American left.
Exactly, and that's what I'd like.
But yes, but any socialist movement has got to be adopt these policies without fear or favor, recognizing that ideologically racism can infect anybody. It's an equal opportunity employer, and we oppose it vigorously wherever it rears its head.
May I sort of chime in? I guess I'm misunderstood, but I'm not trying to push back. What I'm trying to do is one other vector of understanding I think needs to be injected into this. And I'd love for you to come to Eastern Europe and check out people here, because sometimes I have grandmas and granddads on my right-hand side who think the family is, woman, man, children. And on the left, I have a gay couple friend. And it's totally normal. But in Hungary, let's go back to the Soviet Union. I mean, with today's standards, it would be considered culturally conservative. The Soviet family was the basic dogma for most of the time. They had an up and down history with LGBTQ. We all knew that. But that was the history. And in the People's Republic of Hungary as well. But we had gay unions, civil unions. They have medical care. What we had is human rights. Basically, we didn't have LGBT plus QIA, whatever the train is currently now. It's just the last 2 years. And when Orban introduced his the children's defense law, echoing that of Russia, saying you can do whatever you want in your bed, but you cannot indoctrinate children, a lot of the people here, including red-hearted old school commies, said, fuck yes. Including when there was this transgender admiral somewhere in the US, and they sent her to Bastille Day to meet a French ambassador who was also gender fluid. The Russian media, just social media, people said, we want an iron curtain now. We don't want to touch this, just leave us alone. There was a lot of that. And if you go to Africa, you go to 80% of the world. What you're talking to applies to America, for which I'm not credentialed to even chime in. But most of the world, this is the aspect of the NGO foundations, that sort of infiltration. People, I think, rightly see this this mania, this pushery as a part of that. And that's where people misunderstood to say, you know, George Galloway has turned from left wing to right wing because he just doesn't recognize what he terms gender mania. And he's a leader of the Workers' Party Britain, you know, and another level of do you know what I'm trying to?
Yes, I agree. It's a very difficult problem, which I have not worked my head around. I mean, you know, when you talk about preaching to children, what does that mean actually? I mean, some kids, some 13-year-olds are gay, and if a teacher wants, you know, to comfort them, to offer them advice, to not discourage them from embracing their sexual orientation.
That hasn't changed. What they can't do is watch Netflix. So certain Netflix series where a 2-year-old meant for 5-year-olds has 2 dads. What he or she can't do is that. That's what the child protection law is about.
Well, that's something I don't agree with. I mean, that they should be able to watch that if they wish. I mean, back about 10 years ago, there was a furor over a children's book called Sally Has 2 Dads, and about a child growing up in a gay household, and of course the religious right tried to make a big fuss about it. I just fail to see what is the issue here, but I agree that that encouraging sex change operations, pushing this really strongly, taking a really hysterical point of view, perspective on this, trying to intimidate opposition. I just don't know what it's about. What I think it is, I think it's kind of a disoriented bourgeois quasi-radical offensive, and sort of let me in which a certain kind of sector of the middle class is trying to use these ideologies, these movements, in order to achieve power. We've seen this a lot in American universities, where some of these groups, sort of take on the character of stormtroopers.
Oh, European universities too. I can confirm that.
Yeah, and clearly it's a very complicated, very clever power game, and meant to intimidate opponents, to squash dissent. There's the fascinating controversy over diversity statements. In order to be hired by a university, you have got to sign a statement that you will promote diversity. And one statement actually says the kind of attitude that's not allowed is promises to treat everyone alike. So Albert Einstein, who once bragged about treating everyone alike, would therefore not be allowed to teach in that university. It's clearly,
I think you hit the nail on the head.
Some kind of power game going on here, some kind of middle class dictatorship, which is using these kind of radical sexual currents to advance their agenda. I think it's backfiring tremendously, but the people doing it don't really care, because they still reap certain benefits in their own little milieus, in their own little goldfish bowls. So their careers advance. They're able to take control of the academic bureaucracy and win power for themselves. Politically, the broader effects are disastrous, but they just don't give a damn, because they're benefiting in the short term. But still, we've got to take a very hard line in defense of gay rights. A 13-year-old who thinks he or she is gay should be allowed to explore that. Teachers should be allowed to interact with these students in a helpful, sympathetic manner, without being branded as a, what do they call them, influencers, or I don't know what.
Groomer.
And so the sex games, the sexual political games, are getting very complicated out there, and they're getting very explosive. And I
Yeah.
think we'll see that across the board. These
I believe the power game that you mentioned, I think you hit the nail on the head there. And I appreciate this.
Well, you have to. Everybody's playing the power game. DeSantis is playing the power game about the history of slavery.
Yeah.
And Abbott also in the governor of Texas. They're playing the cancel culture game by disallowing the history of slavery to be taught in the schools. And DeSantis, let's face it, he's gone as far as to outlaw using the word gay by any government official of Florida.
Yeah.
Same game. Yeah.
Same game.
Ben, I don't know if you're aware of this over in Hungary, but DeSantis, the governor of Florida, actually was quoted as saying that slavery taught Black people valuable life skills.
Oh, vaguely aware of that, but yes, that's insane.
So it's so
it has to fear
agricultural skills.
Fear whites. Yeah, that's the valuable skill. To be terrified of white people.
So this battle is being fought out in a highly confused manner by bourgeois factions.
Yeah, I wish, to paraphrase sort of the Clinton thing, what do you call it, Lewinsky scandal, I wish they would just zip it and keep the bedroom back at home, out of politics. That would be a wonderful outcome. But go on.
The other aspect is transgendered people, in the bathrooms of the opposite sex, as well as on sports teams and competing against, non-transgendered women. I mean, to me, that's pretty divisive. Those are both very divisive things. And
yes, it's not going to fly anywhere. But it seems that what's remarkable is how people so quickly take sides, especially in this country. So if you're a Joe Biden supporter, then yes, you agree with the right of some male swimmer who has recently undergone a sex change, to win every swim match in sight, and the fact that women who have been training all their lives essentially are shut out by some guy who wins like a dozen gold medals. It's ridiculous, and if you object to it, then you are some kind of right winger. And clearly, any kind of socialist movement has got to cut through this crap, and has got to establish a socialist perspective, which is based first and foremost on equality, mutual respect, class solidarity. In the American Communist Party, the
CPUSA.
CPUSA. The official slogan was, if a white worker behaves in a way that is racist and offensive to a Black worker, it's not up to the Black worker to defend himself. It's up to his fellow white workers to defend him, and vice versa, which is equally as important. The idea is to create an integrated, militant, anti-racist working class movement, and that I think is where every finger in a fist is closed together, and it's not I'm not calling for reducing the anti-Zionist, anti-racist struggle. I'm calling for stepping it up, but in a way which promotes working class unity.
Yeah.
To go back to the transgender thing, I have a very simple solution for that. And especially in sports, and I agree that the swimmer, that was outrageous. All you need to do is have a third category: transgender Olympics, transgender leagues, I mean, if there's plenty of transgender people out there now.
No one would object to him winning that medal. No one.
Yeah, and then the women can compete against the women, the men against the men, and the transgender people against the transgender people. Whatever their transition was, male to female, female to male. Very simple.
The International Olympic Committee not only has taken a very strong stand against drugs among competitive athletes, but it has also taken a strong stand against surgical alteration. The South African runner who was later convicted of murder, who had who had lost his legs in an accident and had these steel springs implanted, which actually made him faster than a normal runner. He was banned from competing. Not only because it would be unfair to the other runners, but they were terrified that other aspiring athletes would undergo the same procedure. They didn't want people chopping their legs off and being fitted with high tension springs in order to win a gold medal. But they were terrified they were terrified that could actually happen. And and certainly if we adopt that attitude, we adopt the same attitude to a man who undergoes a surgical procedure in order to compete in a race, a swim match against women.
Not to take away from your point, but of course these rules can be abused, as was the doping scandal with Russia. These international organizations can always, abuse their rules that were supposed to be universal. Happens with the ICC, the International Criminal Court, but not to take away from your point.
Yeah, I'm aware. Their rules lead to problems.
Yeah, but it was surprisingly cyberpunk. I missed this one with the spring, the man with the spring legs.
Yeah, I hadn't heard about that. That's interesting. I wanted to reiterate Dan's great point. It's our duty to overcome this identity politics that's really been shoved down our throats. And we see, individual groups working to further their individual groups, and they're not thinking, along the lines of class and class unity. They're worried about their individual particular demographic, and that gets narrower and narrower and narrower with all these different categories. And we've got to overcome that somehow. We've got to come together and, recognize that only through, uniting along a class basis can we be a political force that can deal with the entrenched establishment of ruling elites, right?
Yes.
Unified on that. Yeah.
What else do we want to discuss? We have all day, Dan. You got stuck with us. We have all day. You're going nowhere, sir. No, it's been over an hour.
I have a dentist appointment in about. I've got to leave in about 10 minutes.
No problem.
Thanks for one.
I just think the important thing is that the liberal center is exploding. It's collapsing. The American empire is in crisis. American democracy is in crisis, such as it is, as limited as it is. And we're heading into increasing turbulence. That seems to be the bottom line. The turbulence is growing, and due to the turbulence, we have. It's impossible to say where it is going, except that the forces are increasing. And we're passengers on an airplane in the middle of a storm we're being bounced around, and we hope we make it to ground safely, but we know we're keeping our fingers crossed.
Well said. Wherever you are, turbulence is coming. Yeah.
So thanks for joining us, Dan. You're very thoughtful, and we hope that you'll come back. And I enjoyed this discussion. I would like to talk with you more. So
I'd be delighted to.
And so the weekly worker, you have every week you have an article.
Basically, yes. Theweeklyworker.co.uk.
So people can check Dan's work out there. Any last words, Carlo, Ben?
Yeah, I just want to say, Dan, you're very well informed, and your synthesis of ideas is spot on. I really admire your ability to think through things.
And I just like to appreciate the fact, and thank you for calling it the liberal center, because in a lot of the media they call it the liberal left, and I thought they're just unrelated in my mind. I even call them the liberal right at this point. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. See you later.
Shout out to Paulie, and thanks to anybody who watched. Please like and subscribe the regular shenanigans.